to be talking about modular smart accounts today. So I think we can start by going one by one and just introduce yourselves and your projects and the efforts you're making towards account abstraction, and we'll go from there.
Hey everyone, I'm John. I'm the ecosystem lead for Safe. What does that mean? Right now, what we're trying to do is bootstrap a community around account abstraction, smart wallets. So what we're doing right now is trying to launch financial support and non-financial support for projects building these new implementations on smart wallets and Safe specifically. So yeah, a lot of my time is focused on that, doing grants, doing incubators, doing developer relations, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, in terms of what we offer for account abstraction and smart wallets, so we have basically, I think most people here will probably be most familiar with is Safe Wallet. It's a kind of agnostic UI, or more, not agnostic, more opinionated UI to manage digital assets. And then we also offer a developer stack or an account stack, specifically an SDK and API and contracts to implement these kind of use cases that leverage account abstraction, like 457, like social recovery, like batch transactions. So yeah, right now, like that, we kind of split that between Safe Wallet is the UI that most people are familiar with, but also Safe Core, which is the developer stack for building these kind of account abstraction use cases away on Safe and kind of abstracting all those complexities of an account away from the user. So yeah.
Hi everyone. Is this working? I'm Ahmed. I'm a smart contract engineer at Alchemy, and yeah, so Alchemy offers like a full account abstraction developer like suite. So we have the core RPCs, we have infrastructure in the bundler, and a sponsoring paymaster service called the Gas Manager. We have TypeScript SDK, and most recently contract accounts. So we just launched Modular account as a upgrade to our previous Lite accounts with support for multiple ownership, the multi-owner plugin, and session keys. So session keys support customizable permissions, so things like ERC20 spending limits, contract allow lists, and gas limits. And yeah, great to be on this panel.
Hey everyone, thanks a lot for having us. My name is Ahmed. I'm one of the co-founders at Biconomy. Biconomy, we're a full stack account abstraction solution for developers. So all the way from modular smart accounts to paymasters to bundlers, as well as modules. So right now we're the biggest infrastructure company in account abstraction. We've already done over 5.5 million bundle transactions, as well as over sort of 1 million or so deployed accounts. And yeah, we sort of operate in the same category of basically developing and offering modules such as session keys, pass keys, and a few others as well that we're creating.
Awesome. So I just want to go around again and hear from each of you guys. What does the modular in modular smart accounts mean to you? I think the ecosystem is pretty familiar now with EOAs versus smart contract-based accounts. I think modularity is like a theme that's been emerging a lot over the past year in tandem with 4337 and account abstraction, and I think it's going to be a really big theme moving forward as well. So yeah, curious to hear what does modularity mean to you when it comes to smart accounts?
For me, I was speaking with projects 3 years ago, and the kind of going paradigm about them thinking about modules was people were kind of, thinking about the idea of an account being primarily kind of pinned down to the the functionality of an EOA or the functionality of an MPC EOA, that public-private key pair. But as for modules and modular smart accounts, I think that kind of flips the account model, and there's a much bigger range of applications that you can build using modular smart accounts, and a much bigger range of functionality that you can add to your account, leveraging this concept. And again, modular being multiple different use cases, modularized and also extendable as well. So just building upon multiple different benefits that, you know, account abstraction does set out to do, which is this concept of batch transactions, session keys, pass keys, you know, relay transactions, bundlers, gas abstraction, all this stuff. So yeah, just building on top of that, on top of the smart account, and yeah, extending all that functionality to enable new Web3 services and products. Yeah.
Definitely similar view here. I think we've all sort of seen the potential for account abstraction to improve the end user experience for crypto. You know, the various features you mentioned, like session keys, simplified signing, account recovery, other sorts of like access policies. But I think like at its core, it's unfeasible to expect all of these features to be built into a single implementation. If, you know, on the security side, it's infeasible. On the just general like deployment side. So what a modular account framework lets you do is sort of split it into two components and define the responsibilities of a modular like base account and then the plugins that it interacts with. And on top of that, there's a question of like, how do you manage security? What's the sort of security model you build on top of this? And yeah, ultimately a standard or a spec or a specific protocol is really just the technical description and guidance for streamlining the development of a modular account system.
So to add on to what the guy said, so for me, how I like to think about it is sort of two ways. The first is when it comes to sort of modules, we already discussed a few of them. It's the idea around interoperability. And so with modular smart accounts, you can essentially, as a module developer, build any form of module. And that module will basically have access to all the different accounts that are provided in the ecosystem. And so I think that in terms of this is sort of the interoperability and ecosystem aspect, which I find really fascinating, and I think is a great sort of new market that developers could tap into. And then it kind of goes on to the second aspect, which is, you know, it kind of allows for like mini apps to some degree. So like Adam just said, where you could basically provide, so the account essentially provides a specific interface of which is basically let's say it's partnered or it's linked with a verification scheme or linked with let's say a specific execution, a way of executing something, and that allows sort of different, let's say, mini apps that could arise for developers to play around with and actually offer users something that's very, you know, unique to their crypto experience. And so you know, you could think of it as a specific sort of UI that a wallet provide. Like imagine, let's imagine in the MetaMask portfolio, if they were to enable account abstraction, they could essentially enable a form of like mini apps where they could enable sort of different things, and these are all individual modules. And so I think that's also, you know, the prospect that I see for what modular accounts will look like.
Awesome. Cool. So my next question is for John, and we'll go into interoperability in a minute. But so Safe obviously is one of the longest-standing smart contract account implementations out there, and you know, modules have been enabled for Safe accounts for a long time. I just wanted to get an idea of what modules have been deployed for Safes and how they're being used by Safe users right now, and what was the major design considerations that you guys have to make in enabling this extensibility?
I think I would probably, actually, Ita in his last talk described this really well, that essentially with modules you can implement rules and policies associated with how the account interacts, or how a user interacts with the account, and what the account has permissions and rules and policies to do. So I think I would kind of split the kind of verticals and where like modules have been implemented into, I think like crypto payments is a big use case where modules have been implemented on top of Safe. There's also this concept of recovery solutions that have been built on Safe and primarily use the module in that case, or modules. And then the other vertical I would say is this aspect of DeFi asset management, right? Digital asset management with DeFi and portfolio management. I think a lot of like kind of DeFi experts have kind of gone into that field and built modules for Safe to enable those specific use cases. And one of the ones I'm most excited about, and it's working today, is in the payments side. We have. Has anyone here heard of Gnosis Pay? Does anyone have a Gnosis Pay account? Yes, we have two. It's essentially just a debit card that's backed by a safe, a self-custodial safe, and that's using modules to enable that, to enable this use case. This use case wouldn't be possible without modules. And what it does is you assign a rule that only the debit card can interact with the account itself, and also another rule or policy that the account, the debit card's safe or account can only interact with another whitelisted safe that does the automatic stablecoin to euro or US dollar or Japanese yen conversion. And so you have these kind of policies implemented into architecture that enables a very, very specific use case, such as getting through all the different payment rails associated with a Visa debit card, thus enabling, you to use a self-custodial account with in this kind of architecture. And I think modules for whitelisting and permissioning played a key role there. And then of course, in the other verticals we have social recovery. That Safe Wallet implements social recovery right now, where you whitelist a certain address that is time locked and can propose a transaction to regain access to your safe, so you can assign a couple of friends or even an institution to recover your safe under specific scenarios. And we even have Signum Bank, like an institutional grade regulated bank, that is interacting with this module right now to enable like institutional recovery. So that's kind of going into the social recovery angle. And then probably the last one is DeFi asset management and assigning these policies like automations associated with your portfolio rebalancing, or assigning a treasury manager to manage my account, but only doing specific rules like depositing to Aave with a specific spending amount. Like these are kind of the likes of Carpathian and Brahma Finance are doing this right now. And this essentially, this wouldn't really be possible without modules. So that's kind of where the exciting use cases are happening, I'd say.
That's awesome. And in installing a new module to my safe, is the onus on me to kind of make sure that it's a trusted module developer that I'm using, or is there a way to like automate or verify that somehow?
Yeah, I think right now it's it's between the onus on the developers to understand the module that they're implementing for their users. So either they do the due diligence on the security of the module, or even what Ita said in the last talk, some of these don't even care. Some developers don't care and just want the fastest solution. So maybe they don't do the due diligence on the module and just implement it for their users and YOLO. So that's kind of one of the considerations, is the security of the module. And also the users could also have access, like have the ability to select if they want to use the module or not, and it kind of goes into the App Store kind of thesis that Ahmed mentioned. Or you could just abstract that away from the user. In the Gnosis Pay example, I buy a Gnosis Pay debit card. I have no idea that it's using modules, and I trust that Gnosis has done its due diligence as a developer on the modules that they implement.
That's awesome. Cool. So so moving on to interoperability and some of the new standards that have come out over the past year for modular smart accounts. So Adam, in I think April or May last year, Alchemy proposed ERC-6900 shortly after the entry point contract for 4337 came live. And I just wanted to hear about what were the key motivations behind that, and just learnings and iterations over the past year of developing the standard.
So I think the standard was really us kickstarting research and development into the overall like modular accounts space, right? I think it's proposing it as an ERC lets us put it out on CC0 license, fully in the public domain, and give a chance for other groups to take a spec, build on it, and experiment in different ways. And I think by that measure, it's been a success. There have been a lot of in-depth discussions and research that's built on top of ERC-6900, and some important takeaways. And Yeah, as for how it's like changed over time, I think there have been two major changes to the standard. One was the move from delegate call to call, and one was the introduction of the plugin manifest. So the first change, the move from delegate call to call, was actually very directly inspired by research from Richard Meissner of SAFE in response to the original proposal of 6900, basically calling out sort of what considerations this architecture has for security further down the line. You know, as you go from non-modular account to one module to two to n modules, like how does this actually impact the overall security of the accounts? And we did some similar research and testing and generally agree with these conclusions. So yeah, changed ERC 6900 to use call to manage the relationship between the base modular account and the plugins. The second change was the introduction of the plugin manifest. And this was based on the work of Yoav Weiss from the Ethereum Foundation and an author of 4337, coming on to contribute and join as a co-author of ERC 6900. And essentially what a plugin manifest is a declaration that a plugin makes to the account and to front ends about what functionality it has and what permissions over account resources it's asking for. So this helps like sort of disambiguate some install flow. So things that are like, interfaces that aren't exactly lined up can now be specifically decoded in a known format. And the important part is that the permissions that a plugin declares are now enforceable by the base account implementation. And this lets us create sort of defense in depth, it's a Web 2 security concept where there's sort of contained blast radius for each plugins. And rather than them all existing within the same validation, like authorization space, they have like designated areas of the account that they can use. And so the combination of the shift from delegate call to call and the introduction of plugin manifest is sort of what defines the overall security model of 6900 today and sort of what sets it apart from other modular standards.
Nice. And how are developers using 6900 versus Alchemy's Lite account today?
Yeah, so Lite account was basically just a upgrade over the ETH Infinitism simple account. It does some basic things around like enabling ownership transfers, supporting 1271 signature validation, and generally that's used more for embedded accounts where they're looking to just get the baseline benefits of 4337, so things like batch transactions or like sponsoring via Paymaster, but it's pretty limited in that sort of scope. And as developers sort of are looking to get more out of account abstraction, Modular account provides like full featured solution. So we have support right now for like 2 starter plugins for multi-owner and session key. Like I mentioned, session key has like various permissions you can set up on it, and it's like extensible into the future for any other 6900 plugins. And so modular accounts generally better suited for interoperable accounts, but it still supports lots of features for embedded accounts as well.
Nice. So Ahmed, so Biconomy's smart accounts is one of the most widely deployed 4337 enabled account implementation so far. I'm curious to hear what are the most requested features from developers that you've been talking to when it comes to smart accounts, and what led you to explore, modularizing the smart account?
Absolutely. So I mean, just looking at specific data points, not just from us, but just collectively in the account abstraction space. I mean, to my surprise, sponsorship paymaster or gases paymaster is still the #1 requested feature. I would say that typically is comprising of what, 99% of all transactions. So the paymaster allowing the developers to subsidize gas is the major feature, and of course the other features that could come from it, such as gas policies and enabling different form of limits that they could impose. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, another feature, and this one is a module, is a session key. And from that, when we did co-develop that with a partner DApp of ours, we also came into another module called the multi-validation module. And so we're working with perp dexes. What's really interesting over here is they want to essentially enable sessions for their traders to give a Binance sort of like experience. But from there as well, these traders would typically have accounts across different chains. And so the cool thing that could be enabled via the multi-chain validation module with the session key module is that a trader could basically execute a trade on Arbitrum basically they could sign a trade on Arbitrum that would execute on Optimism, right? And so this kind of gives a really cool indication as to sort of what multi-chain smart accounts could look like, because in the future, I, as a user, I want to go and like ape into the new L2. I want to ideally move my funds or the ETH that I have across different, chains, and just like batch send into one transaction to this new L2, right? Like this is the ideal sort of thing that I would love to provide to just existing users, because that would be a huge transformation in UX if you could provide that. And so, gas sponsorship, session keys, along with this multi-chain validation module. I would say, I think account recovery and pass keys are a bit of a. I feel like they're like buzzwords, because the account recovery still, like, I think other than safe in the account, well, at least in the smart account ecosystem, is the only widely used account recovery module. Pass keys, I mean, we still haven't seen so much adoption. It will get adopted. It's just a matter of time, to be honest. I would just say recently we partnered up with Trust Wallet, and the biggest sort of use case or feature there is basically providing over 250 tokens for users to pay gas in. And so this is across at least 7 EVM chains that users could basically pay gas in USDT, USDC. For Trust Wallet, if you pay in TWT, you get a discount in terms of the premium. And so these are like sort of, the main use cases.
Nice. So it sounds like Biconomy started out by developing their own modules first for their account implementation. But towards the end of last year, you guys came out with a new standard for modular smart accounts alongside Rhinestone and ZeroDev and OKX. Could you talk a little bit about the motivation and thesis behind that, about how you think modules would be developed and discovered by dApp developers and end users?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the thinking around, why we created ERC-7579 is to essentially provide a very easy and extensible way for essentially, us account providers to essentially work off from the same standard for a module reference. And so what that basically means is, instead of different teams always having to reinvent the wheel with certain modules, let the best module win, essentially, is the game. And so really we built that with that core focus in mind. And so that was sort of one aspect of it. The other aspect was that we realized that there were some certain execution flows that could be enabled in 7579, or at least through this standard. And because of, I would say, us, ZeroDev and OKX, sort of, we've built accounts and we've kind of integrated a lot of different applications and wallets, and we saw sort of what people really needed at the core layer. And so that's why we wanted to ensure that there was a standard at the module layer. And ultimately for us, the way we sort of think about security is that, just like how we have in iOS and sort of the App Store like approach, there is sort of there is an independent sort of security sort of mechanism to enable apps to go through the App Store, right? And so for 7579, the idea is that developers, projects could easily choose how they'd, like the security to be. And so this kind of creates a competition for the best security standards to come out. And so that's really, in a way, why we built 7579.
Awesome. So my next question is for John, and I'm curious to hear what's Safe's approach been towards these new standards that's coming out, not just for the modular smart accounts, but for things like 4337, which is the relaying standard for how we relay user ops to do things like gasless transactions, because Safe, is pretty much agnostic to even the relaying infrastructure. So yeah, like what are your main considerations and approach when it comes to being compatible with these new standards?
It's a good question. I think Safe had the dilemma of being early, essentially. So like we had created accounts like and account implementations before the likes of even EIP-1271 came about in terms of smart contract signatures, and then of course 457. But how we handle this specifically in the context of 457 is we like enable it through our kind of modular approach. And in general, there's two kind of ways that the safe smart account implements modularity. There's a couple of other ways, but really it's not long enough talk for me to go into that. But the two main ways is giving root access to the safe and bypassing the signature verification, which is a module, right? You configure logic and you can bypass the root access to the safe account, and under certain rules and policies, you can do that and implement some specific rules and policies for the account. The second way is also for calls that don't exist, or that the safe smart account doesn't support at that time, you can implement a fallback handler where essentially the call, it would call the smart account and then fall back to the fallback handler if the smart account doesn't know what you're doing, and then that would handle it. So that's how we handle 457, right? Because 457 does kind of, change how the account interacts with user ops through the introduction of user ops. So we implement 457 via modules and fallback handlers to enable that right now. And I think going forward, this is how, we have a canonical, 457, implementation. It's a module and fallback handler, and we have user ops kind of being used in production right now from projects. And yeah, we definitely 437 is an incredible standard. It is still kind of early days. It still needs to mature. The new entry point was only released, quite recently. It needs to mature, but we definitely see super value in it, and it's going to be it's in our modular stack. And going forward, when it's enshrined into the actual protocol, that's when stuff gets really exciting.
For Safe Core, the SDK, what's been the most widely requested features from dApps or wallets looking to build on it? Most requested feature of Safe Wallet and Safe Core, the SDK, in terms of modules and wallet features.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's Ahmed's point, right? The gas sponsorship, right? dApps don't want their users to, mostly don't want them to interact with, gas or get, caught up in the complexity of handling gas. So, relaying transactions, abstracting away gas is definitely one of the key requirements that we get from projects. And now with 457, you have this standardized approach to implement this. And it means that, if I use a centralized relayer, at least I have 457, that it's a standardized implementation that other paymasters and bundlers can simply use. And I'm not pinned to one centralized relayer. I can use anybody that accepts the 457 standard. And yeah, ultimately gas abstraction is a huge benefit to smart accounts, and definitely one of the biggest requests we've been getting.
Nice. Yeah, I think same question for Adam and Ahmed. Are they, because you guys obviously proposed new IPs and invited a lot of discussion from the ETH magicians community. What has been some surprising requests or questions you had from maybe people looking to build dApps, or maybe people looking to build modules on top of your standards, and what are they looking to do?
So just to clarify the question, is it more is it more on the standard side or more on the product side? Just
on the usage side, demand side for the standard, for people to build on top of it.
Yeah, I think people are just waiting which one's going to win 6900 or 7579. No, I'm joking. I mean, that's tongue in cheek, but it's just more the case that there is definitely I'm definitely seeing some projects kind of waiting to see which standard will emerge, and ultimately it's the good thing is that there is a lot of good debate, there's a lot of good sort of discussions that's happening, and ultimately there is sort of one standard that's being done by the community, and there's another standard that's sort of supercharged by Alchemy with Yoav, and I think it's a free market where developers could sort of decide where they would want to go. I think it would take some time and some real use cases to see sort of which one is going to be more beneficial over the long run.
On that, I think something that's sort of like broader context for like where AA fits into the you know, Web3 ecosystem was touched on by Itai in the earlier talk. But essentially, it's like, what do these accounts really look like? Right now, we sort of have, you know, the deeply embedded accounts, you know, on the AA side or possibly just on the signer side as well. And these generally make very different assumptions about like, you know, user safety or like, you know, permissions. And then on the other side, you have like the truly interoperable ones. That's, you know, starting with the wallets. I would consider like safe in this regard as well. And yeah, like just for consideration, like you have user personas of like a friend tech account, right? Like it's not AA, but even if it was AA, session keys wouldn't really make that difference for its signers just because it has access to your private key already. And on the sort of far end, you have like, you know, DeFi native, like deeply technical applications like DeFi Saver, where all actions and all sort of security and permissions are like communicated to the user. There's, you know, countless double, like triple checks over what you're doing. And I think these are like two far ends of the spectrum. Most apps fall somewhere in between there. And really sort of seeing what this overall trend looks like is where, like Ahmed said, the end users really care about it. Will they ask for that sort of interoperability in the sort of core account security settings? So I think one sort of important differentiating factor between 7579 and 6900 in this regard is specifically the security model. I think 7579 does a good job of like kickstarting these modules. You sort of have new features that you can add to embedded accounts sort of as you sort of need them. But as the sort of number of modules, number of plugins grows above a certain amount, you sort of take on this like systemic risk of a single module failure results in like, you know, the weakest link of the chain breaks and account security is compromised. And I think that's where 600 takes a more opinionated stance on the overall like account architecture and security architecture of this with a explicit and defined security model. And so we just sort of believe this is the sort of scalable step needed to take accounts from embedded to interoperable wallets while still preserving modularity and support for new AA features as time goes on.
Yeah, and I'd say another way to think about it is, especially if you're sort of like, that this is like a debate in a very small developer community, but just a like easy way to think about it is 757, like a 6900 could be built on top of 7579, right? Just because of the fact that it has an opinionated sort of security sort of model, whereas there could be others, but you might have.
Yeah, so I've heard this take. I actually don't really think that's an accurate take just because of like how 7579, this is like, you know, very technical, but where the status of a validator lives. You know, there's no specific way to like scope it to an area. It's if a validator returns true, if an action may be performed by the accounts, it happens. And I think this is something where it inherits a lot of sort of design DNA from Safe about the sort of root access model. And there are ways to like, you know, incrementally expand this with like safeguards or whatnot. But I think fundamentally it is a different model towards security than what 6900 does.
Nice. And how, yeah, curious, I think this is a question for everyone. How are you thinking about the discoverability of modules? I think we've seen with MetaMask snaps, right, that kind of launched with this thesis that the wallet becomes a platform where developers can use the wallet as a distribution channel for their products and services. Do you envision the modular smart accounts to be exposed, the modules to be exposed via like an app store like interface, or for it to become, for wallets to become installed with specific modules depending on the dApp developers that are embedding these accounts, or more by end users that are maybe installing like a Rainbow wallet and then adding features after the fact?
Yeah, I'd just quickly chime in here. So, like what Adam said earlier, like you have this sort of full spectrum, right? So from a very simple embedded account to like a very sophisticated DeFi type dApp. We're going to see, I'd say, like just different flavors. So you will have, you know, embedded wallets with smart accounts with predefined modules, as one example. You will have Trust Wallet and other sort of major wallets out there that will essentially provide sort of this mini app experience. Now it's their choice whether or not they will, provide that piece sort of very explicitly, or they might again have predefined modules for their users. So that's another way. Third way is potentially seeing app chains who will basically customize quite a few things in terms of how they'd want to implement smart accounts as well as modules. So again, this does depend ultimately on who the user is, the customer, and sort of it will go from there, because there will be a world where there will be a world where sort of MetaMask and all these others will eventually showcase smart accounts, and we're still yet to see what that standard would look like. Will it be EOAs and smart accounts? We know in the very long run smart accounts is the future, but it's this interim period which is still a bit is still not clear. And something that we've been working on is on the module store. So essentially, basically a discoverability marketplace for all different types of modules that are built for smart accounts is something that we're working towards.
I think the end sort of state of like the sort of bigger goal we're building towards is in some ways similar to OAuth or signing with Google, where you have sort of this trusted model of like user control. You can specify sort of what aspects of your account the app is able to interact with or even see. And I think the implementation of this is spread both across the on-chain and the off-chain components of this. But the end result is once the users pass that onboarding step, the actual like intricacies of the account sort of melt away into the background. They kind of fade away, and the user gets like fully focused on the app itself. And I think this has lots of like technical components that can build up to it. Things like a registry for specific modules and audit metadata. But ultimately, it's going to be a mix of the wallet and the embedded accounts, abstracting that out from the interaction flow and the sort of like hurdles that it poses, but keeping that like fundamental self-custody and user security and control in mind.
Also just add one short point that I think, like, before we get to the discoverability problem, I think we should really prove the value of modules to the entire ecosystem and not just a kind of smaller ecosystem of smart account implementations, and really prove them against the likes of MPC and EOA technology. And I still think there's some way to go in terms of proving the value and proving the adoption and increasing the adoption. And you see there's new smart accounts, implementations popping up nearly on a weekly basis. So now we're in a place where we can really bootstrap accelerated adoption, and then the discoverability and, as Ahmed was saying, who is the best module will kind of come to fruition, and then we'll have, okay, how do we disseminate that to the user and the developers, and how do the developers understand, who is the best or who should be discoverable and who shouldn't.
Point is that like modular account frameworks or modular account standards are really, I think, should be viewed as a framework. It's a toolkit towards building up parts of AA to like solve broader problems. So I think something that is a problem in like AA space that we have to deal with is the problem like cross-chain state divergence. I think that's a huge one. Modular accounts has the potential to give us those building blocks to say like, okay, here's a take at solving cross-chain interoperability. It's a key store on one chain and some cross-chain read from the other. And maybe that works, maybe that doesn't. But the ability for the account to like take that implementation, add it to an existing account that has some other sets of features, and if it's user doesn't want it or doesn't have features they request, then they can uninstall and add another one. So I think to your point, like it's the question of like, will the modular ecosystems and tools and frameworks work? Is a question of like how well they're able to address the like real user problems at the end of this.
Nice. I do have one last question, but wanted to open it up to the audience in case anyone has a question for the panelists. So if you want to ask something, please show of hands.
when it comes to these like modular like app stores, right, or like these decentralized app stores for modules, who would be running it? Who would be managing it? How would it? What would the operations and what would some of those details look like?
Yeah, no, really good question. So this is something we're, really in the weeds in, and I mean, right. So if you sort of first look at it, there's a registry, right? There's a module registry working with a company called Rhinestone on this, and so modules would essentially abide by this registry, which is sort of being built out, and this is like, I would say, sort of one type of way of how modules in a way could get discovered. Of course, there are modules that Safe have done. There are modules that are happening in sort of like a fragment of a DeFi ecosystem. The concept behind this module store is more, at least the idea of basically giving it's, I would say it's more discoverability of information rather than actual execution, because initially developers would want to see, okay, what are the different modules out there? What is the difference on the technical side, maybe the business model side, the security side as well? And ultimately, it would really boil down to like how how these different modules are basically sort of different compared to each other, right? And that's one part of it. And then I would say on the integration side, that's still something I'd say we're still trying to understand and figure out, because typically for a developer to integrate with an account, they would go through their SDK, their docs, and then sort of integrate the modules from that side only. And so right now it's more of a, I would say, information discoverability standpoint, at least how we're thinking about it, so that we can at least open up a way for developers to see what types of modules are there and how they're different compared to the rest.
I would just add as well that like we're kind of like at Safe we're very much obsessed with kind of like the security point around like disseminating the security information to the like via the module store, via the registries. So we're working currently with auditors on ERC-7512, which is like an on-chain representation of an audit. How do you get all this metadata on chain? How do you understand, okay, it complies with this auditing standard, which follows a standard that the auditors agree on, that this should be done when we're auditing, a smart contract, or at least having the key information on chain, or at least exposing that on chain so it's more discoverable via the module store. So we're working on that currently, but again, it's going to be another standard, right? But I think having the auditors backing that is going to be a key thing.
I agree with the phase of experimenting and testing out the module store and registry. I think on-chain audits is a really important initiative to add to that as well. I think one last sort of piece of this that I think is important to touch on is how do these contracts actually connect to the front end? And I think that's a place where a standard or some sort of format really helps. To give an example, like specific to the context of things that we're working on at ERC-6900, the plugin manifest gives this as sort of like a descriptor of what capabilities does a plugin have, what permissions it's asking for, what can it do. And the fact that it's in a standardized format makes it really easy to integrate with off-chain systems like front-end systems. So we have an example in our AA SDK, the TypeScript SDK, that automatically generates plugin bindings specific to this in a way that's like extended and has more context than just an ABI, because it has the knowledge of of its current install state, the current account capabilities, and the sort of relationships between the plugins themselves.
Awesome. So we're out of time for